Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Tell me about this manuscript, which is called a palimpsest, right? What does that mean?
Well, it means a scraped-off version. Nowadays, of course, if you're writing something and you make a mistake, then the paper is already printed. There's not much you can do about it. But in the times of the Quran's first writing, because animal skin was used as your writing surface, and these were expensive to obtain, if you were not pleased with what you wrote, then you wanted to write something over, then you would scrape off what you already have written, and then you would write over it. Now, with old Qurans, with the passage of time, sometimes the ink fades, or for a variety of reasons, people may want to rewrite it. So sometimes you go trace over it the best you can. Sometimes it's better to just erase the whole thing and then start over fresh. And we also have the phenomenon that in the early stage of Islam, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we know from Islamic history, were permitted to read the Quran in a variety of ways. And the palimpsest that we are now to study seems to be one of those early Qurans that have now been recovered.
Is this one of the first circumstances in which a Quran is written over, text of the Quran is written over another text of the Quran?
It's only one of two cases that we know about. In the other case, the Quran's text has been erased and something biblical has been written over it. But among Muslims, generally, a Quran would not be written over like this. But for Muslims, it's always a puzzle as to what we're going to do with worn-out leaves of the Quran. Mm-hmm. In the modern publishing era, what would happen is that some publishers will take the old leaves of Quran and use them as kind of a stuffing in the hardcover of new Qurans to be marketed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. So the sense there is that you want to preserve the old leaves in a way that will maintain their dignity. They will not be thrown into a dump or a garbage heap along with garbage stuff. Mm-hmm. We want it to be put in a place where it will be held with respect. So what better place than to put it within the cover of a new Quran so that it will always be held and treated with respect.
Mm-hmm. We know that there are two layers of the Quran on this skin. So tell me how old the skin is.
The skin has been carbon dated to be from the period of 578 of our Common Era all the way to 669 of our Common Era. And to put that into perspective in Islamic terms, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is said to have passed away in the year 632. So 669 being the latest date given for this manuscript with a 95% accuracy, we see that this manuscript comes from a period of about less than 40 years after the demise of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
So it's pretty early then?
It is pretty early. And to be clear, what the carbon-14 dating tells you the date when the animal died. It doesn't tell you when the actual writing was done. But the nature of the case is that for practical purposes, the dates are going to be the same, because it's not like these parchments were there. You couldn't go to your local stationers and say, give me a stack of parchments.
They weren't in ready supply.
Exactly. Usually the animals were slaughtered, on order. You needed so many sheets to write on, so many animal skins, and you would slaughter the animals specifically for this writing project. So the date of the parchment is practically the date of the writing as well.
Mm-hmm. Now tell me, there are two different texts. How different are they, each of them, from the text that we have today?
Well, the upper layer is very similar to the text that we have today, and it is one of what scholars would refer to as Uthmanic manuscripts. So in the story among Muslims about how the Quran came to be as we have it now, it is mentioned that the Caliph Uthman, who reigned anywhere from about 12 years to 24 years after the death of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, within his reign, he had commissioned copies of the Quran to be made and circulated to various parts of the Muslim Empire. That was only the bare consonantal ductus, but that ductus is read in a variety of ways, and one of the ways is now preserved in our standard Qurans, which are available throughout the world, the reading of Hafs on the authority of Asim. Now, that upper layer of the San'aa Palimpsest corresponds in its consonantal ductus to basically what we're reading today and what we're holding in our hands, with some slight variations. The kinds of variations we know to have existed in other copies of the Quran, which have been found, many manuscripts, some of which we have discussed on this show, like the Tübingen manuscript, the Birmingham manuscript, and so on. They may differ slightly in some very insubstantial ways, but basically representing the same text. That's the upper layer, basically one of the Uthmanic copies.
So tell me about the lower layer then, because that's the one that people talk about a lot. How different, how much of a variation is it from what we read today? There's a lot of variation in words and in the sequence of words, and sometimes substitutes are used which are synonymous to what we have in our text, basically presenting the same message, sometimes in a slightly different way. Of course, if you change one word, you change the meaning to a slight extent, but does it make a whole lot of difference in that, does this text represent a different faith, or a major change from what we have in our hands today? And the answer is no. So if the best way to answer that question actually is to give you some samples. That's what I was thinking.
So we have here a book by Safiyyah Ally, which is basically a transcription of the San'aa Palimpsest, and it gives you both the upper and the lower layer. So since we're concerned now with the lower layer, which is the earlier text, which has been scraped off. If we read a portion from it, we will see that basically it's what we have in our hands today, with some slight variations, and we can note what these variations are. This is from Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, starting with verse number 87. It says, وَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ كِتَابٌ مُصَدِّقٌ لِمَا مَعَهُمْ قد كانوا من قبل يستفتحون على الذين كفروا فلما جاءهم ما عرفوه. Now here they have added hu at the end, but it means the same thing. It's just a slight shift in the emphasis. فلما جاءهم ما عرفوه كفروا به فلعنة الله على الكافرين. So basically that means the same as what we have in our hands today. Whenever a book comes to them confirming that which is already with them, even though they previously were hoping for a victory to come from God over those who disbelieve. Despite all of that, when the message comes to them that they already know, they disbelieve in it. So God's distancing will be on those who disbelieve in his message. So it's the same thing, a slight addition of one particle, which changes the emphasis a little bit, but it's the same. Actually, there's not even the change of emphasis. Here we should say it's a stylistic difference. Like,
so what's the most problematic part? Like, let's say, what's the most different part of this
lower text that you've noticed that people might think is, questionable or problematic?
In terms of theology, I don't find that there is any major difference.
Okay.
In terms of practice, there is one verse which has been noted to indicate a slightly different, what we call a fiqh ruling, regarding how a man may interact with his wife around the time of her period. And it is a difference that was already known in classical Islamic jurisprudence. And in fact, it's a difference that still exists in classical Islamic jurisprudence. But the reading here in question seems to be similar to what has been reported from Ibn Mas'ud, one of the early companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, one of the early Muslims. And this is found in the second chapter of the Quran. And it does not present a major difference. It is a difference which has been noted in the classical commentaries on the Quran. So in terms of theology, it does not present a different faith. The worry that believers have is that scientists and other fields of specialists in other fields may discover something that upturns your entire faith. And we know that in Christian history, there's been this dilemma and this dichotomy between the Jesus of faith and the Christ, the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. So are we finding in these texts that there is a dichotomy of this nature? Like, is there a difference between the Muhammad of history and the Muhammad of faith? And these manuscripts do not present any such dichotomy. Basically, these manuscripts are showing us that the same faith was held by whoever wrote these documents. So there's a slight inversion of the way things are said, what is said first, what is said second, and so on. But basically, it's saying the same basic message overall, to the extent that we can see verse by verse, we have the same message. It's as if you have like a verse slot, another verse slot, and verse by verse, it is all saying the same thing one after another. And for that to happen, it means that conceptually, the Quran, from start to finish, is already there in the minds of people. Only in one case, Benam Sadeghi, one of the scholars who worked on this San'aa manuscript, found in the case of Surah Taha, the 20th chapter of the Quran, that there is an inversion between what we now have as verses 30 and 31. So in that manuscript, it's in the reverse order. But some verses can be interchanged like this, and the meaning does not get affected. And there is one case where in the 9th chapter of the Quran, the 85th verse, what we have as the 85th verse is missing from the manuscript. But Benam Sadeghi explained that as being the result of what he calls haplography, which is known from textual criticism more generally, that sometimes the scribe misses something because his eyes skip to a line below that has a similar word. But nothing there is embarrassing about that verse to require the scribe to skip it because he doesn't like it. It's just a simple human error.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
So much we could talk about, but time is running out. Thank you.
You're welcome.